Zoom code. This is a driver. Side driver on the YouTube world. Greetings. My name is Michael Miller. This is a Michael Miller trademark training video out to you because you're watching. Thank you and welcome. It's meant for Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates, the Core New Core, and anyone interested in surviving and thriving as a Pilates instructor. I usually make notes before or during my workout, intermediate reformer. Still lucky to be doing that. And then come to YouTube first to make a broadcast and to try to address the same titles that I took notes on and consolidated up to this point. At the end of the broadcast, I toss the notes into a pile, and then I'm content to see what comes up in the next day and make a broadcast of that. So between the facility of broadcasting through a phone to the world via YouTube, it's such a rare and new opportunity to offer what you have to say to anyone interested in hearing it. Do what you can while you can, right? Number one, I have how many things? 3 things today. 3 things. Number one, and they're coming in the reverse order that they happened in. What does a Pilates instructor see? I think that's a good title. What does a Pilates instructor see? We're talking about Pilates instructors and what do they see? And the chorus goes wild, each with their own voice, in passion and perspective. And I can only make a stab at some of the things. But definitely a Pilates instructor does see, does look. I remember wondering and arguing or talking about if a blind person could teach Pilates. And as different as that would be to not be able to visually see your client, there's so much you can know about and be tuned in to Pilates that can make up for the absence of visually seeing your student. The more you know what you're aiming for, the easier it is to hit, and the calmer it is to be about who you are and what you're aiming for and how to hit it, which is this perspective of MMP as Michael Miller Pilates and CT as core new tension, and CT is just pointing to the biomechanical fact of oppositional rotation between axes in the body. Core new tension, oppositional rotation between axes in the body. And specifically within MMP, these 6 axes from head to metatarsals are the point of view that MMP comes from in reaching for the performance of Pilates. So, you can see a student coming from a distance, from a window, and looking out the parking lot. And maybe never met them yet, but see how they move through space, and you see what their gait is like, and how fast or how slow they move, their pace, their gait. Well, the gait's one thing, pace is another, right? And then how they carry themselves, where they bear their weight. All kinds of things. And then you meet and you maybe even see them more up close, but before you've ever met them, how they move, what they favor, demeanor, all kinds of things. And then, okay, so Martha Graham's father often said, movement never lies. And I totally agree with that. And so really just maybe saying the same thing, but that my way of saying that is that movement reveals itself. Maybe it reveals the source of the movement, what I'm saying. But so as an instructor, when you ask a person, when you're headed towards something, so where am I headed? Somebody completely fit and comfortable in a Pilates studio and ready for anything, apparently. And I say, what do you want to do? And they say, that's up to you. Well, of course, I want to go do the mat, right? And yet I'm polite enough to make enough timing in my whole selection that it can easily be overridden by the whim of the student. And you have to listen for that as an instructor. See, what to me matters is that as the teacher, you make the point that the mat is the method. And if you really if you're really in pursuit of the performance of the method, then let's get down and work on the mat, right? And yet the mat is so brutally individualistic without the influence and subtleties of apparatus. More specifically, spring tension. Yeah, usually someone is willing to put mat on a back burner and say they'd rather work on the reformer or do stuff on the Cadillac or even the barrel, which is a static piece of equipment, but facilitates more than a mat on a floor. Why is that? Because a mat on the floor is just in plane, one dimension, and a ladder barrel is a half of a barrel that's supported on a stand that has a ladder connected to the side of it so that you can control the positioning of your body by either foot or hand connection to the ladder. I probably couldn't describe that again if I tried. But so what does a Pilates instructor see from a distance? Energy gate, up close. Source of initiation. So you get them on a reformer or wherever you want, and you say do or begin, and they move. And so a Pilates instructor sees where the movement comes from, right? At source of initiation, sees how it's initiated and always looks where the Pilates instructor sees side to side, not just where and what, but from which side, or on what side, or at which side, or differences, or similarities. Because the body that we occupy has sides to it, left side and right side down the midline. And then lastly, I think, and most esoterically, but really obviously, because of the MMP point of view, the Pilates instructor sees where there is the absence of whole. Now, W-H-O-L-E. So Pilates is a whole body effort. Contrology develops the body uniformly. So if you're doing something uniformly, or if you're developing uniformly, if that's the target, then the Pilates instructor knows the target. And the student may be a long way to the day when they hit the target. And yet, I contradict myself all the time by saying that when you accomplish that complete coordination of body, mind, and spirit, that is the target of the experience. But the experience is aimed for in the performance of the choreography. And it's in the pursuit of the choreography, because of its ideal nature, that movement reveals itself. Imbalances reveal themselves. And so a Pilates instructor sees a really round back, except for that one place, right? And then in the pursuit of uniform engagement, to get uniform development, or to be doing it, developing uniformly, the Pilates instructor sees the absence of wholeness and goes to work to facilitate release or participation or whatever will make something more whole in its effort. Number two. I'm very deep today, or broad brushstrokes or abstract. This doesn't have to be that way. All right, so the title is The Way Through the Rabbit Hole. So usually it's like you go down into the rabbit hole, and then you try to get your way out of the rabbit hole. But to me, that makes it sound like there's always that you begin at the same place that you start. And that, in my experience, doesn't usually seem to be true. About my excursions into the rabbit hole, which is all part of being a Pilates instructor, I think, and having a sense of what you're trying to do, navigating your own way, so that whatever you encounter in the rabbit hole has at least a context in which to be compared to. Okay? Now, what does that mean? That means that MMP is a view of Pilates that's ideal, and it's a reasoned argument based on the evidence in Joe's book, and that's all it needs to be what it is, which is good rather than bad. Depends on your point of view, I guess. But insofar as Pilates can be whatever you make believe it is, Pilates is whatever you make believe it is, because Pilates is a word now, and the word is the mother of 10,000 simulations of what that word means. Each of us make a simulation of what it's like out there in reality, and it's our consciousness, our individualness that we use to navigate and make choices as we go through life in general. And then as an instructor, what I'm saying before I even describe the rabbit hole is that the beginning of the rabbit hole and the end of the rabbit hole are both the same. Insofar as the MMP point of view of the world that we live in and the science that we're aware of and our biological nature within the physical world that it exists in are consistent givens. The consistency of that isn't whimsical, evidence-based and all that, and because of that has the stability in its point of view. So, with that said, there's a curvature of the spine, right? And it's called scoliosis, where I come from. And as far as I know, nobody really knows what causes it. And only efforts can be made to adapt to it or live within it. And of course, if there's new science that I'm unaware of, I'd be glad to hear about it. But in its mystery of manifestation, there you go, there's a phrase for you. In its mystery of manifestation, the Pilates instructor that has, to me, the MMP instructor has a goal of an experience through a choreography, and yet the capacity of the individual may be far removed from pursuit of the original choreography. Right? Wheelchair bound, hospital bed bound. To my point about the curvature of the spine and scoliosis and being an instructor, practically speaking, I'm taking a very lovely woman into a first session, and she doesn't mention much. She says she has a little bit of scoliosis, I think, not on her form, but just in conversation. Okay? And this ties into what does a Pilates instructor see? And see, so the thing to learn about what does a Pilates instructor see is knowing that there are things you can see if you ask to see them. And a standard way for me to evaluate a student's spine is have them up against the wall with their feet propped out so they can flex forward and hang off of their hips. Knees unlocked, preferably, right? But just in that bend, if you can actually see their spine, or at least a leotard over the top of it, that at least reveals contour, you can see a lot about where the bones are and where the muscles are that often aren't symmetrical. And so this woman, as I began the lesson, I said, well, maybe I'll just, not something I ever do normally, just as a first thing to do, but I walked her over and put her against the wall and asked her to do a slow roll forward. Now, if it wasn't painful or anything, she says, oh no. And there was a very large difference in which side of her body occupied space and which one did not. And had I not asked to see, I would have been less informed for the instruction I was about to continue with. Okay? So I asked to see and I saw a lot, and so boom, down into the rabbit hole. And that's because the rabbit hole is, maybe I'm saying, is such a um, um, a variation from the norm that it becomes part of the confusion in the rabbit hole of what to pay attention to and what not, and what to do to accomplish what, and in what order, and in what way. There are now dedicated workshops to what easily took up major parts of a conversation in a training program if you didn't curtail the exploration. In all of that, in all of your exploration of what one might do to take what you know and respond to extreme variations from the norm, this broadcast is meant to remind you that the rabbit hole is something you travel through insofar as the environment that, to me, the environment is what defined the choreography, and that doesn't change the message in the choreography because it's a comment about the reality that we're in. And so when you're in the rabbit hole, you're still after uniform eccentric loading flowing through progressive patterns of movement, which is the definition of the ideal according to MMP. Okay? And at least hearing it, it won't be maybe until you get into the rabbit hole and start looking for air or context or relevancy to something else. You know, where is the MMP buoy? May only be a buoy, but it's at least fixed in its location so that you know where it is regardless of where you are. I'm full of gems today. Number three. So Kara Swisher is a commentator about many things, I guess, but her specialty, I think, is the tech industry. And she was talking about a phrase that I clung to, but she was talking about riding in self-driving cars, and that was directionally where it's always going, and whether it was in our lifetimes or not, that's where it's headed. Okay? And I, from my point of view, attached to that, Pilates, and where is it going? Well, directionally, it's headed towards, well, I say, headed towards the ideal. It's humanity as a collective is no fool. It's proven itself rather resilient. And part of that resilience is not ignoring the reality in which it exists, especially when understanding of that reality offers one an edge in trying to survive in the art of understanding that reality, meaning Pilates. And that perhaps Pilates actually is a response to reality and can be understood as an ideal. And so, if there weren't one or not, if one could be made up, it would be to be self-serving to the humanity that wants the ease of access that an ideal makes of it. Now, I said ease of access, but not necessarily competence of use. There will always be spectrum in everything, and interpretation and capability and capacity. You know, it's an alchemist's job to blend elements or capacities in this case, and so my words came down to these, or synthesized to these. In your lifetime or not, meaning in my lifetime or not, Pilates is headed towards its ideal. Not just the, but if there is, it is its. So the takeaway from MMP is that, hey, there's an ideal there, and whatever you make of MMP, the directionally, it's the correct way. And to me, it's correct because in any endeavor or culture, the embrace of that culture no matter what ulterior motives applied to it, will be of its own and will come out as itself. So Joe already made his point. That's monumental. It's fundamental to the human existence, to the human experience, and the response to a human being discovering themselves in this world as a human being. Where forget about or don't make any interpretation about where it came from or how many times you've been here, but boom, you show up and you got to deal with what? You got to deal with gravity, right? You got to deal with being a fish trying to swim through an ocean of air. And the physics of that, the biomechanics of that, continue to evolve, and someday the core new tension and this MMP would just be a blip in self-awareness to humanity's press through the world. Expansion. There you go. I guess I mean more than the world in that. So I'm saying that Pilates is headed toward the ideal. That would have to be correct, right? Where else would it go? How else could it be controlled other than by in some way acknowledging its essence and then making a value addition beyond that? That's my point. Nothing will change. The aristocracy that I'm a part of and you're a part of will always stay the same. But understanding itself about what that aristocracy is built on and the nature of it won't be so make-believe in the future. And directionally, that's what matters, I think, to survive as a Pilates instructor. It's just going to press people to higher ground than what they have now. And that part of that higher ground will be in whatever way it's perceived ideally, to the point where ideally will be the way it's perceived. But that may even take past the year 4040. All right, so what does a Pilates instructor see? Geez, that was the whole subject, and yet then how does the Pilates instructor respond to what they see? Visually, auditorily, tactily, aromatically. It's an arena that has yet to be tapped for what's possible within us, I think. Because having a more thorough understanding of the ideal, at least this interpretation of the ideal, right, cannot help you resonate with whatever you make of it, knowing that that's out there. The reality is out there. So no matter how much you make believe Pilates is, whatever you want, being aware of a reasoned argument based on evidence to construct a theory of an ideal within Joe's original work just based on his definition, his promise, and his sequence. Then when you've got the definition of core tension and the definition of the ideal, you have in your hand, what do you have? I don't know, what do I have? I have a sense of comprehension and comprehending, understanding of control, right? Now, that may be disappointing in that all of your involvement with your world is a feed toward you at the center of it. And, the Pilates culture is one big expression of self-indulgence. But if you're out there and you're asking, why is this what it is? Or can someone explain this to me? Not who knows who, but what is what? That's an old expression. What is what? The rabbit hole is still part of the physics in which we live, at least what I care to think about or talk about. And so as a Pilates instructor, however far you go away from or adapt or work with variance from the norm it still is existing within the same constraints. Gravity is the same for everyone. Weight is the same for everyone. No matter how it's born or moved. MMP is conceptual. And right there, I saved that for the end of the broadcast. But when you even have any exposure to it at all, it can only enhance what you already know. And can give you a reason for why you do stuff beyond who you learned it from. Or, more especially, stuff you make up on your own. Does it fit or doesn't it? Within MMP, the definition of the ideal is uniform eccentric loading flowing through progressive patterns of movement. From within that context, you can at least evaluate something you made up and see to what extent it fits. The key thing with MMP is that there is something to fit. It has an essence of its own. Now, most views don't even look at things that way. So recognize that difference. Right? Don't alienate people by exposing them to what they don't want to be exposed to. The trick is getting to be an instructor in your own way, for your own pay, in your own, under your own terms, without alienating the environment in which that happens. You have to survive in the court, and not just in class. And even then, life can't live forever. Read between the lines, see behind the curtain, add two and two, direct your thinking. Geist